Okay, everyone, welcome to an episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. To have a really cool update for you guys from the brand Seagull watches. Now, they're a Chinese heritage brand dating back to 1955. The difference between the Seagull watches and their parent company, Seagull watches, can be a bit confusing, guys. So I'll specifically be referencing the official Seagull watch store and their products. Now, the official website established and operated directly by Taijin Seagull Watch Group. So that is going to be the one. It's the direct source for genuine Seagull watches worldwide. So again, I know it can be a bit confusing, and there's probably better channels to explain the semantics around what owns what and what is, you know, the official kind of arm or leg of any brand. But again, just to reference where this watch was sourced from, as well as where the link down in the description leads to. Now, in terms of type of watch, this is a dive watch. Some key common characteristics and design. When you're looking for a diver, of course, you're going to find water resistance, typically paired to some type of screw down crown, or you want something that's tough, legible, with a dive time bezel and a diver's extension is always nice if on bracelet. This is the Seagull Ocean Series Pro 300 meter in the blue colorway, and they describe it as a watch crafted for diving enthusiasts with lugs inspired by Seagull wings. And they do combine strong specs and build quality in a versatile package for daily wear across multiple scenarios. Now, this actually goes for $499 direct, but there is a discount you can get, guys. It'll take it down to $419, which is 16% off if you use AVG 16. You know, and that will work for any one-time purchase of any watch in their store, not just this watch. Also, guys, just to make sure we all know, this sample was kindly provided by the brand for the purpose of this video review, but no brand ever has any editorial input on the review, and all thoughts are always my own. Now, in terms of that, hey, a little bit of a longer intro, but with that said, let's go ahead and zoom the camera out, get this piece in hand, and take a closer look. Okay, guys, so very, very handsome piece. So of course, when Seagull reached out to me, they didn't have to pitch this to me. I actually picked this one out and said, hey, would you be interested in possibly having this particular model featured? Now, one of the main reasons why is it hits a bit of a sweet spot, 40 millimeters in diameter, about 40.6 millimeters at the bezel. So there's this ever so slight overhang there. You do have about 13.6 millimeters in thickness, including the height of the crystal, 47.5 millimeters lug to lug, all stainless steel, brushed and polished accents throughout. As you guys can see, you're gonna have a flat sapphire crystal on top, and you're gonna also have a 60 click unidirectional bezel with a lumed sapphire insert as well that has a bit of a dome to it, so you can see there's gonna be a bit of protrusion. Nice bezel action. It's just 60 clicks, but it is very tactile still. I will say that, actually, yeah, lined up pretty well, but if you try to like rest it on the click, it can rock a little bit out of and back into alignment. So nothing crazy. Again, I give the same type of pass for micro brands, Seikos and Citizens, on a daily basis. So this isn't something that is unique to just Seagull. So that's why, as much as nobody likes a little extra play in their bezel action, it is sometimes helpful to have just enough play to realign everything perfectly. Now, with that, of course, now I'm having to wipe the bezel and the crystal and the grip down because they're all very glossy. So that's can be a drawback for some, but again, you're not going to be necessarily touching your watch is going to be on your wrist. So for the purpose of review, I'm going to be getting my fingers and fingerprints all over this watch, and all of those polished portions are going to show those fingerprints. But in reality, again, you're not typically going to be heavy-handed with touching your watch. You're going to touch it when you set it, you're going to put it on, probably wipe it down, and then, if you use the bezel, of course, you'll wipe it down after use. Now, the crown is screwed down and signed, as you guys can see. And then the case back is nicely stamped there. Check that out. And with that, underneath that case back, you have their in-house Seagull ST2130, which is based on the ETA 2824-2, except it has 28 joules versus ETA having 25 joules, or Sellita with their SW200 having 26 joules. But in terms of everything else, it's going to be very, very similar in terms of the power reserve, about, anywhere in between 42 and 38 hours, depending, results can kind of vary. And then you're going to have that full 4 hertz sweep, and, which is going to be 28,800 vibrations per hour. So quite nice. Now, when we get into the dial here, guys, you have this cool fume blue sunray dial with applied indices and polished hands. All looks very good. You even do get a sloped chapter ring there as well. There's an unspecified lume that does glow green, which I'm looking forward to testing out here when we get to the low light transition portion. It does have 30 bar or 300 meters of water resistance. It has 20 millimeter lugs. This 3-link bracelet is solid. It does have female end links, which is nice as well. Traditional spring bars there, so no quick release, and a very traditional, some might even consider it dated, clasp here. But in terms of the bracelet itself, it tapers from 20 millimeters to about just under 18 millimeters, so not a drastic taper by any means. So it's going to be a little bit more of a modern kind of overbuilt kind of feel versus it being more vintage with that more refined taper. You do get a split pin construction here, so very easy to swap out the links there. As you guys can see, there's going to be the outer links are polished, center links nice and brushed. Then getting to this push button locking clasp, you get 3 positions of manual micro adjustment. You do have that milled scissor folding section, and then the clasp shell itself is going to be stamped. Same goes for the lock mechanism. So with all that said, let's get this on the wrist and see how it wears. Okay, as you can see on my 7.5-inch wrist, 40 millimeters, just like you'd expect. Fits very nicely. Of course, my wrist, although it is on the slightly larger side of average at 7.5 inches or 19 centimeters in circumference, it's quite a tall wrist, you can see, and round, so it's not like this flat, wide, and accommodating wrist profile. So I do have to be cognizant of things like lug to lug, overall dial proportions, dial to bezel ratio, etc. in terms of the way a watch wears. You can see a little bit on the thicker side at 13.1 millimeters. They're not using a lot of tricks in terms of that mid-case architecture to visually reduce the weight, and I should say the visual weight. But ultimately it's not actually that thick. The fact that it is 40 millimeters also does, if this was a 42, you'd probably look at it and go, that looks pretty thin, because the visual weight would be spread out a bit. Of course, if I get my wrist a bit too close to the camera lens here, guys, you're going to notice a fair amount of perspective distortion. It's making the watch case seem much larger, as you're seeing the sides of my wrist kind of fall away from frame in this, and with that, the sides of the bracelet are too. So I'll keep my wrist nice and low, and look at that. All of a sudden, it just looks better proportioned. It hasn't changed in size. It's just, again, that perspective distortion. So I'll just keep my wrist down here and then tighten up the frame like so that you guys can get still a detailed look, but just add a bit of a truer aspect ratio, guys. And I have to say, design-wise, very, very handsome. And, some people really are enthusiastic about the Seagull brand because of its in-house qualities and attributes. And I think that's something, to be admired, and not everybody's ready for it. But I mean, at the end of the day, guys, there's so many components, which if you ever talk to watchmakers that are ever doing servicing, they're getting components, from these Swiss-made brands, quote unquote. And, their all country of origin is China anyway. So, it's something to consider. I do appreciate Swiss-made watches and kind of the implied quality that comes with it, but, they don't have the only quality assembly areas. They're not the only ones with quality, levels of QC, QA in terms of execution. I'm not saying this is some, crazy, hidden gem in terms of the quality, guys, but don't just write it off because it's Chinese, because I mean, look at that nice bevel work. Look at the transition, nice and sharp in between brushed and polished. Look at this fume dial. look at the design, right? It's not just another kind of variation of something else. It's really its own thing, and I can appreciate that. And, you know, especially when there are brands out there that are just, you know, living off of other people's designs. So yeah, I think the fact that Seagull's, it does have its own history, it does have its own design cues and design aesthetics. I think that it's a brand that is a bit underrated. Now, at the price point, at just under $500, you know, of course, it'll be just over 400 if you use the discount, though. You know, there are tons of watches in this space, and many of them can be of a higher spec. They won't be in-house, though. And the ones that are in-house are going to be Japanese watches from Seiko or Citizen. And if you look at those watches, they're typically not going to be spec'd this high. So that's something to consider as well, right? No, the architecture behind this movement isn't, you know, original to them, but you know, so many movements have been inspired by some of the very expensive, quote unquote, in-house manufacturer movements are based on the same architecture, guys, that people give a pass for, and they're spending $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 on those watches. So yeah, I mean, everybody has to start somewhere. And yeah, I've always kind of had an interest in Seagull just because they're one of those Chinese brands that are openly Chinese and proudly Chinese. So it's cool to kind of see that and really get a look at this in some detail. So with that said, let's actually get this off the wrist, set for some Lume shots, low light transition, and closing thoughts. Okay, let's go ahead and hit the lights here. Okay, check it out. So not too shabby for Lume. Of course, having the Lume underneath that bezel crystal is going to be a bit of a limiting factor. But yeah, this is dive watch, so you would want the Lume to be quite bright. I'll go ahead and give it a bit of a supercharge here with some black light. So not the brightest in terms of that initial brightness, and you can see that it does taper off in terms of its hold and kind of fade over time. But one thing I always like to work in is going to be a bit of a low light transition, because you're not always going to be out in the middle of a field enjoying direct sunlight. A lot of times you're going to find yourself coming out of buildings, walking underneath overhangs, or just hanging out underneath the shade of a tree. So it's nice to see what these colors, textures, and finishes render like in less than optimal lighting. And as you guys can see, that dial is extremely dynamic. You have that fume gradation where it's brighter in the center, darker in the outer reaches of the dial, and then you have, of course, that dynamic, vibrant blue cutting through, which never overpowers, never, look at that, even if I try to wash it out, I mean, I can wash it out, I guess, like that, but for the most part, you're still going to get a good amount of legibility there. You can see that bezel insert just isn't up to par compared to the rest, and the hands also falling off a bit. So that's a bit of a disappointment, guys. But what I'll do now is we'll hit the lights here. All right, and get into, ooh, look at that dial. So yeah, it definitely looks better in the light than it does in the dark. That's just, I mean, maybe the way that it should be. In terms of closing thoughts, guys, on the wrist, full-sized and substantial feeling, maybe even a touch top-heavy with their more minimalist clasp construction. Now, I don't think the watch case is inherently heavy, but the fact that you don't have a heavier, more substantial dive clasp isn't helping kind of balance that. And I think that it would, especially when you think about that bracelet with a minimal taper, it feels a little bit chunkier on top, it feels a little bit chunkier in the middle, but then underneath it doesn't have the similar heft. So yeah, if they are paying attention to this video, Seagull, I think, you know, you put a more substantial milled clasp on there, that'd be great. Also, alternatively, you could add a little bit more of a dramatic taper as well. Now, and of course, screw pins would be great instead of the split pins and that construction. But at the price point, you know, it's you can't necessarily complain. But there's a lot of brands, again, that are really spec heavy. And you know, Seagull as a heritage brand doesn't necessarily have to be as race to the bottom as some of these other brands that are just trying to kind of grow and survive. So you know, in the same way that if you look at a $500 Seiko watch versus a micro brand watch, right, or even like a $2,000 Longines that has split pin construction. So, you know, some things to consider there. In terms of comparable models, guys, if you want to match the in-house nature of Seagull, you have to look at Orient, Citizen, or Seiko, and then in the $500 price range, it'll be tough to find something with Sapphire and a 4 hertz sweeping movement. Oh, one thing also to touch on in terms of model variants, do check the site links for current options, availability, and pricing, guys. And don't forget, if you do decide to purchase, feel free to use that code. So yeah, I mean, if you could pay less, then that's always better for everybody. In terms of the bottom line, guys, as an enthusiast collecting in the affordable range, you know, I think we often kind of have to trade off in-house heritage for high specs at attainable and at an attainable price point. But not in the case of Seagull, right? I think their Ocean Series Pro 300 meter does offer you a lot of heritage as well, right? In terms of the Seagull branding, the in-house nature. So I think that's pretty cool that you still get that, you know, and, you know, instead of settling for a lot of the kind of more down spec watches from Orient, from Seiko, from Citizen, you can still get something that has some heritage, that is pretty up-spec'd. It's not perfect. It's not, you know, it's not the greatest watch at $500, but for those of you that have been looking at this watch, that have been curious kind of how it looks in the metal, how it might feel, if you're looking for something with a little bit of extra heft, if you're looking for something that looks great out on a sunny day, you know, this, and it has some real heritage. I think you could really get a kick out of this watch. But let me know what you all think down in the comments below. If you like the video, please like, and if you're already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.